We thought the Messiah would come as a king wearing a crown, or as a conqueror waging war. But here, we find a newborn baby. We expected to find him in a palace, but instead, he's lying in a manger. There isn't a spotlight, just one star's light. It's unexpected, unassuming, unfamiliar. But here he is, Jesus, our King, in total humility.
Hey everybody, good morning and welcome. I'm David Dwight, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to Hope, particularly if you happen to be new with us today. We hope you're encouraged by being here. So, Christmas is come and gone. Comes in a big flourish, and then there's kind of a big drop-off. And I guess different personalities and the way you feel about Christmas affects a lot of how you experience it all. We all know that there are a lot of people who find Christmas to be a time that they really get the blues or worse. And maybe that's because of all this emphasis about how you're supposed to be so happy and you may not be feeling that way. And we can appreciate that. So you're either happy it came or you're happy it's gone. So either way, you're happy. It's the day after Christmas, the Sunday after Christmas. And I do think there's this little piece in our minds, which is, well, what do we do now? We did the tree, we did the presents, we did the nice meals, and all the rush and the flurry is over. And there is this little well, what do we do now? Like, we're Christians, okay, we celebrated Jesus, we celebrated the birthday. That was all really great if you like it, not great if you don't like it. Either way, we have this sort of what do we do now thing in our mind. I think sometimes if we're honest, for some of us, what do we do now is a little bit more like, that's it? The more that we are pressed to the emotional highs of Christmas without really engaging the depth of what Christmas is all about, the more the formula sets itself up for disappointment. There's no way it could be otherwise. If we don't really have a sense of what this is all about, what this birth of Christ, life of Christ, the fuller story is all about, then all of this energy and emotion, it can't but leave us disappointed. It's like a tease. It's like an emotional no-win. Unless we have a sense of the deeper, more rooted, important stuff that is all involved in what the birth of Jesus is about. So if you've been here for the last couple weeks, promise today will be the last day I talk about it. I've gotten pretty enamored with this whole idea of Advent calendars. You've heard me say it. You have heard me say it. All right, well, I promise, 30 minutes on the Advent calendar and that's all. But truly, this whole exercise that there is more going on here than meets the eye is a really significant message. But if we don't know that, the whole experience of Christmas, the hype, the shopping, the songs, the white Christmas and all that, it's an emotional no-win. So I mentioned that Elizabeth and I decided this year we were going to do a scriptural Advent calendar, and we're going to read the Gospel of Luke. And the symmetry is nice because Luke has 24 chapters. So we're going to start on December 1st, and then we're going to finish Luke on Christmas Eve. Luke also has the fullest depictions of the birth narratives of Christ. So you start with the birth narratives, John the Baptist, Jesus, and then every day you read a chapter, it's like opening a window on an Advent calendar that's giving you a reveal of what's going on behind Christmas. And we see Jesus teaching and healing and ministering and we see him living his life, and we see him executed, dying on a cross, resurrected. So part of the beauty of it is on Christmas Eve, this may sound weird to you, but on Christmas Eve you're reading about the resurrection because it's chapter 24 of Luke. And then on Christmas Day we go back to Luke 2 and we read, "Born to you this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord." It's really helpful because by the time you get to Christmas Day, you've been focusing on the deeper, fuller story. It helps diminish a little bit of the emotional no-win experience of all the buildup that can sort of just leave us like with a baby in a manger. And that for sure leaves us thinking, well, what do we do now? If we're just left with a baby in a manger. So the more we build our emotion to Christmas without knowing it, the more inclined we are to be let down. But if we have a sense of what's behind it, the less it's a tease and the more it's an invitation to the deeper places of our heart. We do well to be reminded that Christmas, the birth of Jesus, is the beginning of it. I love in the Gospel of Mark 1:1, just the opening words of the Gospel of Mark, he says, "The beginning of the good news about Jesus Christ." Okay, and you know this, I think, but when the Bible was written, there were no chapters. That was all a much more modern annotation to make it bite-sized. When the Bible was written, there were no chapters. So for instance, when Mark is writing, he's just writing this whole thing. It's his story of the life of Jesus Christ. But interestingly enough, he calls it the beginning of the story. Okay, if you've been around church for a while, you've heard that the word good news is the same word gospel. The word gospel means good news. And if you've been around church for a little while, that's going to put you to sleep. We would do better to hear Mark saying this like the great news. The beginning of the great news about Jesus. Because if you've been around church for a while, you've heard the word gospel a lot. It doesn't do a lot. It's kind of like good news, like a flu shot is good news. Like, yeah, maybe it'll help. But we would actually receive it more accurately to the intention if we read it with the beginning of the great news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. The whole thing is the beginning of it. You're like, no, he meant chapter 1 is the beginning, right? No, he doesn't even have a birth narrative. Mark doesn't even have a birth story. He just gets right into Jesus' life. And then we get the crucifixion and the resurrection. All of it is bundled together. There were no chapters for him. And he says all of that is the beginning of the great news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. Okay, so if that's the beginning, many of us are like, well, what's next? And that's what we're going to try to look at this morning a little bit. The Gospels speak frequently, and Jesus taught frequently about his return, about his coming again. And Fleming Rutledge, a theologian you've heard me speak about this Christmas season, says the first coming of Jesus guarantees our assurance of the second coming of Jesus. And if we only focus at Christmas on the first coming of Jesus, we're left like holding sand in our fingers, like what do we do now? What we do now is we live this life in a relationship with him with a joyful anticipation of his return. So I'm reading some of her writing and I'm thinking, I don't think I've really heard anybody in the Christian world or in the church teaching on the return of Christ in the last decade or so. So here you go. So Matthew 25, Jesus describes it this way. This is challenging teaching, but he's talking about his return. Okay, the analogy that he's using is a wedding analogy. Different versions of the Bible translate these 10 women as either 10 virgins or 10 bridesmaids. I think we get less lost if we call them bridesmaids because that's who they are in the account. He's talking about a wedding situation. They're clearly the bridesmaids. Okay, here we go. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins or bridesmaids who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but they didn't take any oil with them. In other words, any extra oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the virgins woke up and they trimmed their lamps. The foolish one said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. "Lord, Lord," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you. Therefore keep watch, because you don't know the day or the hour." Okay, what's being rendered here? This is Jesus teaching a few basics. What he's teaching is he's coming back. That's absolutely clear. He's coming back. What he's teaching is devoted living in humble waiting is the way to do this life while we're waiting for him to come back. But he's also using a wedding metaphor, and a wedding is the biggest, grandest, most joyful, overflowing celebration that culture knew. So when he's speaking about the fact that he is coming back, he wants believers to live with this incredibly joyful, excited anticipation of something wonderful and glorious. I don't know how acquainted you may be with the Bible or church background, but a lot of people have this real hesitancy about this. Well, what's going to happen when Jesus returns? And do I need to be scared about it or concerned? And what's going to happen? What he is clearly saying is, if you're a person with a devoted faith, you should be living with a joyful, excited anticipation, because it is going to be great. But he also paints a picture of people who are disregarding it. And that's sobering. Okay, so as we get into this, let me back up for a moment and get some context here. The birth of Jesus in the Bible is described as a dawn, a dawning of light. It's not the full light of day. It's the dawn where the light is just rising on the horizon. In Isaiah 60, just one of many examples, "See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." I love Malachi chapter 4, verse 2. Beautiful verse. "For those who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings." It's talking about a rising sun. It's talking about dawn. The birth of Jesus is described and prophesied in the Bible as a dawn. It's not the full light of day. It's not the complete fullness yet. It's just the dawning of the light. So if you're disappointed because you wanted the full light, well, hold on for a moment. But the dawning is remarkably relieving. The people who have lived the longest dark nights are the ones who are most relieved when the light starts emerging in the morning. What you know when the light starts emerging in the morning is the darkness is going away. The darkness is going to be defeated. The darkness is going to be dissipated. So we don't have the full light of day yet, like we're not putting our bathing suits on yet, but we do have the dawn, which is the assurance and the hope that the light is coming and the darkness is being defeated. And that's the way the birth of Jesus is described. The full light of day is the return of Jesus. So the Christmas season is often called Advent. Advent conveys this idea of a season of waiting or anticipating, but primarily waiting. There's a first Advent, which is waiting for the birth of Jesus. There's a second Advent, which is waiting for the return of Jesus. We just celebrated the first Advent. What do we do now? We live in the joyful anticipation of the second advent, the return of Jesus. Christmas is front and center. Everybody talks about it, celebrates it, etc. The return of Jesus is a much more obscure biblical idea. I mean, not even close in our cultural awareness and acclamation. And for many of us in the church even, we're like, we don't get it. Like, what in the world? Like, what do we do with that? Jesus is teaching a bunch of stuff about his return. The first is, it's real and he's coming. And if you're thinking, yeah, really? Fleming Rutledge says, yeah, really. And how do we have a yeah, really? His first coming assures us of his second coming. So the first coming is a dawn. We've been waiting for it. The first coming, actually, biblically speaking, is cloudier and grayer to understand than the second coming. The first coming has prophecies, but you know, when you read the Bible, there's lots of people trying to figure it out, and they're saying, what did the prophet say? We don't know. Where's he going to be born? What's he going to be like? We don't know. So it was clearly prophesied, but you had to do a little bit of connecting the dots. The second coming, there is no need to connect the dots. 100% clear. Jesus came the first time humble as an innocent baby. He comes the second time royal as the glorious judge and king. I remember years ago hearing a Bible scholar teach on this a bit. It was a long time ago. I was a relatively new Christian. And after he was finished teaching, I asked him a question. I said, hey, I'm just feeling like a little bit concerned. I have a question. He said, about what? I said, well, we know that when Jesus came the first time in his life, lots and lots and lots of people like missed him or don't pay attention or don't regard him or don't respond to him. Is it possible that when he comes again, the same thing's going to happen? He goes, no. Like he was on the edge of his seat about it. He said, no. I said, why? He said, the Bible is unequivocally clear. When he returns, he will return in glory, and every single person will know this is the coming King Jesus, believer or not. So he comes incognito in humility when he comes the first time. There is no incognito-ness about his return. Glorious, the coming king and judge. It's remarkable to me that he was born in a trough, he died on a cross, and he's coming on a throne. This is Jesus, and this is who we're talking about. So what we do is we wait with humility and joyful anticipation. The two groups of bridesmaids, we're clearly being given a compare and contrast between the two groups. One group has brought extra oil with them. They're clearly saying, I will wait as long as it takes. I've come prepared to wait as long as it takes. When you are devoted to somebody, you'll wait as long as it takes. If somebody you love dearly is coming on a plane and that plane is late, you'll wait as long as it takes. It all has to do with your heart's disposition to the one you're waiting for. If you don't take it seriously or you place it beneath you, you'll drum your fingers and get frustrated. Say, what am I doing wasting my time waiting for you? You see, the two groups, one group has this humbleness of devoted waiting. The other group has basically placed this groom beneath them. They're drumming their fingers saying, this is a waste of time. I'm not taking extra oil. I'm not going to stay out there all night. The group that Jesus is saying is the group you want to be are the ones who are waiting with this joyful, devoted preparation. Dale Bruner, Bible scholar, says the extra oil that they brought with them, he calls it the oil of obedience. In other words, it is the way they will humbly and obediently live as they anticipate his coming. Obedience is really interesting because you could have tons of church-going people, but the obedience in our lives is generally a hidden thing. We wouldn't necessarily see that on the outside when we're all sort of all in our places with bright, shiny faces. Obedience is more of a hidden thing. And half of these women had this oil in reserve, hidden in reserve, but it was there when they needed it. That oil is an expression of their devoted hearts, their love for the one they're waiting for. And they're happy to wait as long as they need to. They place themselves beneath him in his goodness and glory in devotion to him. But the other bridesmaids, he's beneath them. They see him as beneath them. They're like, I'm drumming my fingers. What am I waiting for? I'm wasting my time. What's going on in your heart when you're waiting says an awful lot about an awful lot. Take, for example, the reality that when you're waiting, you're in the subject position. And when you're waiting, it requires humility to be in the subject position. Let's say you made a dinner date with a friend, and you're going to meet at a restaurant at 7 p.m. And you get there a few minutes before 7, and you're shown a table, and your friend isn't there. And so you're waiting. What's going on in your heart while you're waiting? You're either thinking, this creep is making me wait, or you're thinking, I hope they're okay. The difference is enormous. It's essentially the parable. What's going on in your heart while you're waiting is enormously revealing. You probably heard me say this before, but waiting isn't actually waiting until it's taking much longer than we thought was reasonable. It's not actually waiting until it's gone on much longer than we thought was reasonable. As long as we're in the window of time where it feels reasonable, it's kind of anticipating. But waiting has this element of being humbly in a position where we don't know exactly when the person's coming. Waiting is really waiting when it's gone on longer than we thought was reasonable. In our culture, we're lousy at waiting. We hate it. We all know it. We all talk about how long we had to wait in line. If you've done some returns in the last couple of days, we did some in our family, you look at the line and you're like, oh my gosh, we're horrible at waiting. If the Starbucks line is more than 3 people, out the door. We say that we're waiting at a stoplight for the light to turn green. That's not really waiting, that's anticipating. You know about how long it's going to take. It's going to be ballpark 90 seconds. Unless you're at Pump and Broad and it's 90 minutes. But most places, it's 90 seconds. You're anticipating. You know what's going to happen. You know it's happening real soon. Waiting is when you're in a humble enough position, you're not sure how long you have to wait. And what you're doing in your heart is saying so much about our humility or not toward the situation and the person we're waiting for. And Jesus is revealing this in these 2 different groups of women. Let's say that you lost a job, you really need money, you have a job interview set up, and you're excited about the prospect of it. It's an 8 a.m. job interview. You're going to get a 7:30 a.m. bus that will get you to the job interview on time. You get to the bus stop and the bus doesn't show. And you're trying to check it and track it. You're not finding information. You're in a tough spot. You have a lot invested in that bus coming on time. The bus isn't coming. You're in a subject position of waiting. We're not good at waiting in our culture. A little sidebar, and I mean this 100% sincerely. If you want to try a little practical spiritual growth takeaway this week and in the coming weeks, intentionally create situations where you have to wait. Intentionally create them. Intentionally go to the store at the busiest hours. Intentionally go to Short Pump between 2 and 4 p.m. Like, make yourself wait. It's a really good spiritual growth exercise. Humble people can wait. Proud people won't have anything to do with it. So we live in the second advent waiting for him to come. And the group that Jesus is saying is the group you want to be are the ones that have brought reserve oil. Their hearts are, we love you. We'll wait as long as we need to wait. We're happy about it. We're fine. The reserve oil is hidden. It's the obedient humility of their hearts. Interestingly enough, in the original language, when we read in English, it says the bridesmaids who were ready and the bridesmaids who weren't ready. In the original language, it doesn't have all that wordiness. It says the readies and the not readies. That's what it says. So when Jesus is giving this parable, he uses the term, and the readies had reserve oil, and the not readies didn't. But here's one of the powerful reveals of this teaching, and this is challenging teaching. Jesus wants to give believers this incredibly confident hope of a joyful anticipation, but he also wants to clarify what his return will be like so everybody can hear about it and be prepared as though he's told us. One of the things that's very clear is the not readies say to the readies, let us use some of your oil, and the way the parable is revealed, that's not going to happen. Dale Bruner, the commentator, says, the point is you cannot borrow somebody else's faith. You can't borrow somebody else's devotion. You have to have that heart on your own. It's got to be naturally who you are. So in Advent number 1, we're waiting for the birth of Christ. In Advent number 2, we're waiting for the return. In Advent number 1, we have the dawn just beginning to rise, that sunlight, which is this incredible relief and hope that clarifies for us this long, dark night is coming to an end. And the more you've had long, dark, hard nights, the more the news of the dawn is a joyful relief for you. It's not yet the full light of day, but Jesus is making it very clear to us that the full light of day is coming. Advent number 1, the dawn, Jesus in a wooden feed box, powerless as a baby. Advent number 2, the full light of the glory of God, Jesus on a throne with all power and authority his. Now, when I say that, in the room, some of us are saying, this is just such dumb church nonsense. And some of us take this deeply to heart. This is what I can tell you. Jesus wants you to take it deeply to heart. It's clearly what he wants us to live like and understand. The dawn is the moment the hope enters, and it assures us that the darkness is being defeated. But this full light is coming, and his first coming assures that the full light is coming. In Matthew 25, listen to this. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. You see, Jesus is fully man and fully God. Jesus is baby in a manger and king on a throne. Jesus is powerless to our and up to our mercy as an infant, and he is all powerful as the judge and king who will return. You've heard me say this, but we're all raised in Western educational paradigms. We don't do the both and very well. We're always splitting things apart to try to understand them. So we want to say, which is Jesus? Is he God or is he man? He's both. Is he infant, humble, or is he returning glorious king and judge? He's both. And it's only in the both together that we really begin to grasp what the Christmas story is all about. He came a powerless baby. He will come again a powerful judge and king. All right, so I know what some of you are thinking. When? When's he coming? Okay, can I just say something gently and clearly? Stop it. Just stop it. The Bible is clearly teaching us, do not give your energy to the when. It's a waste of your energy. And also, it's an interesting question to ask. Why do you want to know when? Why do we want to know when? I guess presumably so we could slough off until 10 minutes beforehand. But that's not what Jesus is teaching us about this life of joyful anticipation. And remember, it's a wedding, the way he describes it. For believers, his return is this joyful wedding. He will come as the judge who turns everything that is dark to light. Everything that is of the old order of things. That's the way it's described in Revelation. Jesus says, I'm coming and I will change the old order of things. What's the old order of things? It's hard for us to grasp that it's actually the old order of things because it's everything the way we currently know it. It's death, decay, decline, pain, depression, anxiety, divorce, war, political strife. That's the old order. It's so normal to us that we're like, that's the old order? It's what we live in. Jesus says a day is coming when that old order of all that pain and sadness and brokenness and tears and strife and anxiety and hardship and discord will be done away with. And his kingdom will have no end, as the Christmas carols tell us. And it'll be a glorious kingdom of light. And for anybody who's a believer, he's saying, live your life now with a joyful anticipation of his return and an obedient and humble living of serving him while we wait. So, the Jewish wedding is the analogy. He's using the Jewish wedding analogy, and just a snapshot of it if you don't know. In those days, when a young man wanted to marry a young woman, the young man went to the girl's father, said, "Can I marry your daughter?" If the father said yes, they were betrothed. The young man goes home to his father's and family home, and they would live in the groom's family home. And so he would go home to prepare the home, either add on to it, construct more to it, or get it in ship shape so that he can bring his wife to come live with them there. They would live in the groom's home. It was up to the groom's father alone to say when the home was acceptable and ready for him to go get his bride and get married and bring her home to live with him there. So in Matthew 24, Jesus said, "But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father knows." Do you remember in John 14:6 when he said to the disciples, "Trust in God, trust also in me. I'm going to prepare a place for you, and where I'm going, I will come back to take you to be with me, that we would be together forever." His promise is he's coming back. For believers, the promise is joyful anticipation. That's the way the Jewish wedding worked. So when the groom got word from his dad that he could go for his wife, this always happened at night in a small village setting, and he would send his groomsmen with torches, a parade of light, through the village shouting, "The groom is coming." And all the energy of the joyful anticipation would begin to burst through the village, and the bride would be the recipient of this news. She'd have a couple of hours to prepare, to get dressed and get ready. Her bridesmaids would gather and help her, and then the groom would come, and the wedding would happen, and the celebrating would happen, and all the merrymaking would take place. So Jesus is born, this little helpless infant in a feed trough. He'll return on a throne. 3rd century theologian called Cyril of Jerusalem said, "There is a birth from God before the ages and a birth from the Virgin at the fullness of time. There is his first hidden coming like that of rain on fleece." That's his infant birth, incognito, hard to know who it is. There is his first hidden coming like that of rain on fleece, and a coming before all eyes still in the future. So if you know Yogi Berra was a professional baseball player like 60 years ago, Yogi Berra had a way of saying things that were profoundly true and eminently confusing. Yogi Berra said stuff like, "When you come to a fork in the road, take it," that kind of stuff. So I read recently that Yogi Berra had a quote, and he said, "Well, guess what, friends? The future ain't what it used to be." Once Jesus has assured us of his return and the glory that this dawn will become the full light of day, and everything dark will be done away with, and everything right and good and true will come with his righteous reign, the future ain't what it used to be. And so Will Willimon, Christian theologian, says, our lives now are stretched between the sneak preview of the new world being born among us and the old world where the principalities and powers are reluctant to give way. In the meantime, which is the only time the church has ever known, we live as those who know something about the fate of the world that the world does not yet know, and that makes us different. You see, normally our experiences of life, good or bad, shape our expectations of the future. And if you've had a bunch of hard experiences, you begin to be fearful about the future because what you're experiencing is shaping your sense of the future. But what Jesus wants us to do here is reverse the order. Because for us, he wants us to know that the future is glorious beyond our wildest dreams. And knowing that that is the future that's coming completely changes the way we live in the present. And that's what Christmas is all about. Let's pray. Lord Jesus Christ, born a baby, killed on a cross, returning on a throne. Lord, can we just confess to you that no matter where we are in this spiritual journey, it's hard for us to grasp and get our heads and hearts around all of it. But Lord, you've spoken to us plainly that you want us to live in humble, obedient waiting and joyful anticipation. So will you help us in that road? In both of those things, humble, obedient waiting and joyful anticipation. We pray this in your name. Amen.